They were once the soaring voices of R&B, legends whose songs carried hope, heartbreak, and the dreams of Black America in a world that rarely played fair. But behind those timeless melodies and soulful ballads hid a painful truth. That voice that once moved you to tears? It belonged to someone who died alone in a rundown apartment, lost in a haze of booze and regret. That radiant woman with the flowing hair and dazzling smile? She collapsed more than once in the studio, her body worn down by white wine and sleeping pills. And they weren't alone. At least 20 iconic artists lived with a silent sorrow too deep for words, numbing it only through alcohol and tears. What you're about to uncover is a hidden chapter of music history, one that may forever change how you hear the songs that once healed your heart. Watch closely. And if you feel their pain, drop a comment. Let the world know we haven't forgotten them. James Brown, the bloody king behind the curtain. He wasn't just the godfather of soul, he was the heartbeat of a revolution. James Brown turned every drumbeat into a declaration of freedom, every electrifying dance move into a protest for a generation desperate to be heard. He didn't just shape music, he shook the very conscience of America. But behind the spotlight was a storm no stage could contain. Born into crushing poverty, raised in violence, and jailed as a teen, James didn't grow up learning harmony, he learned survival. His weapons weren't just microphones, they were alcohol, control, and a lifetime of bottled-up rage. Then came that fateful day in September 1988. James stormed into an insurance office in Augusta, Georgia, wild-eyed and furious. Someone had used his private bathroom, and to him, that was a violation. His bloodshot eyes and trembling voice made everyone freeze. He was carrying a handgun. His blood alcohol level? Off the charts. Moments later, he tore down the highway in a wild, multi-state police chase straight out of a Hollywood thriller. When they finally stopped him, he bashed his head against the police car door, shouting incoherently. The nation watched in disbelief. The man who once roared, "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud," was now a broken image on the evening news, disheveled hair, dazed expression, locked behind bars. America didn't just witness a fall from grace, they watched a soul unravel in real time. But beneath the scandal was something deeper. Not just a fallen icon, but a wounded child, abandoned long before the fame ever came. After the chaos, James slipped quietly into rehab. When he returned, he looked older, worn, but his eyes told a different story. Softer, clear. He no longer danced like fire, but his voice still carried the weight of the world. And when he apologized, it wasn't for being drunk. It was for letting pain take the wheel for too many years. We're quick to worship stars when they shine, but slow to hold them when they shatter. James Brown's story isn't just a cautionary tale, it's a cry for compassion. A reminder that even kings can bleed. And sometimes, the greatest kindness we can offer is to forgive the wounds others never had the words to explain. Joe Tex, the screamer behind the curtain. Joe Tex didn't just sing, he howled, he moaned, he bled through every lyric like his soul was on fire. Nights ago, I found myself in a dimly lit disco, and someone played one of his old tracks. It wasn't music, it was a cry. Joe never performed like anyone else. His voice sliced through the air with raw soul-funk power, like each word was carved straight from his chest. Once a fierce rival to James Brown, Joe Tex lit up stages with passion, but behind the curtain, he was a man unraveling. Most fans never saw the man backstage, the fragile figure trembling with a bottle of white wine in one hand and heartbreak in the other. At a 1963 Houston show, he was supposed to open a major gig. Instead, he sat in silence, whispering to his stage jacket like it could calm the storm inside him. Crew members recalled him hurling a chair against the wall, convinced someone was after him. When he finally stumbled onto the stage, he collapsed on the very first note. The crowd froze. Joe burst into manic laughter, screamed, "They're trying to kill me," and had to be carried away, leaving behind only gasps and confusion. A year later, he released You Better Get It, a track fans believed was written not for us, but for himself, a desperate call to hold on. But alcohol never loosened its grip. Fellow musicians said Joe would spiral, shouting insults in drunken fits, then breaking into tears like a lost child. His eyes, once bright with fire, grew dim with pain he never put into words. One reporter once wrote, "Joe Tex could leap off the stage to hug a stranger, but he could never leap off his own shadow." At 49, he died of a heart attack, officially due to illness. But those closest to him knew better. They said it was the slow collapse of a man crushed by loneliness, addiction, and a heart too full of things he never dared speak. At his funeral, a friend whispered, "Joe didn't die because he stopped loving music. He died because he no longer remembered why he loved it." Joe Tex's story is a soul ballad no one likes to hear, a melody that fades after the applause dies. But if you've ever fought your demons with a forced smile, ask yourself, how many times have you screamed on the inside while pretending you were just fine? Johnny Taylor, the fallen angel in a white suit. Before he became the seductive voice behind America's most beloved love songs, he was a man of the cloth. A preacher. His voice once soared through church rafters, lifting hearts toward heaven, filled with hope and holiness. But the moment he stepped into the glare of the entertainment world, something shifted. The choir was replaced by crowds. Faith was traded for fame. And the man once anointed began to slowly unravel. Born into poverty, Johnny sang his way out of the struggle. Music became his sanctuary. But success came with a price. The applause couldn't fill the silence in his soul. The money couldn't drown the guilt. And so he turned to alcohol, the only thing that could hush the voice inside, the voice that reminded him of everything he'd lost. Then came that night, July 1977, Chicago. Taylor was set to perform at a packed, high-end tea house. The crowd buzzed with anticipation, ready to hear the man who had once lit up the nation. But when he took the stage, something was wrong. His hands trembled. His eyes were glassy. He smiled, but it didn't reach his soul. He opened his mouth and sang the wrong lyric. The band tried to guide him back, but he spun around and yelled at them mid-show. Then, turning to the stunned audience, he shouted that something, or someone, was possessing him. He smashed the microphone, cursed the air, and stormed off stage. Silence fell like a curtain. For weeks, the incident became a whispering wildfire in music magazines. Some said he was possessed. Others believed he was just broken. Loyal fans insisted he wasn't crazy, he was crying for help. But no one really listened. After that night, Johnny vanished. Months passed before he reappeared. No white suit. No bright smile. And when he sang, his voice carried a new kind of weight, one born of sorrow. In a rare interview, he said quietly, "When you've stood before God, and the world still judges you, you learn to drink until you can't feel anything." His story is a haunting reminder, not everyone in white is an angel. And not everyone who prays knows how to forgive themselves. Johnny Taylor was a man consumed, not by weakness, but by the ache of needing someone to stay when his spirit was at its lowest. So if you ever see someone losing control, don't laugh. Maybe they were once a shining light. Maybe life just blew too hard. And if you're ever the one falling, remember this. Sometimes the way we save ourselves is by choosing to be kind. Zezy Hill, the man who missed his date with destiny. He didn't look like a movie star. He didn't dance like James Brown. He didn't preach like Sam Cooke. But when Zezy Hill opened his mouth, a storm came out, rough, aching, full of sorrow and soul. His voice sounded like it had wandered through 1,000 sleepless nights, and somehow, it brought the blues back to life for Black America, especially in the South. He gave broken people something to believe in again. But the saddest part? He couldn't believe in himself. Born into a poor, crowded home in Texas, Zezy knew from the start, if he didn't sing, he'd disappear. And when fame finally came, he didn't run toward the spotlight. He ran toward the bottle. In 1981, backstage in Baton Rouge, Zezy walked in holding 2 bottles of wine. "I can't sing right unless I finish the second one," he told his assistant. The band froze. No one dared to stop him. When he stepped onto the stage, the lights hit his sweat-soaked face. The crowd cheered as the band struck up Down Home Blues. But Zezy came in off-key. He slowed down. Forgot the words. Then, right in the middle of the song, he sat down on the stage and kept singing like he was talking to ghosts only he could see. The audience fell silent. The MC was about to cut the mic, but Zezy suddenly stood, raised his hand, and whispered into the microphone, "I'm sorry. I can't stand the sound of my voice when I'm sober." The room went still, like a church after the sermon. Some people looked away. Others cried. The next day, the papers tore him apart. One headline called it a disaster. But a smaller column told the truth. He's not failing. He's fighting his demons, and he's doing it on stage. 2 years later, Zezy Hill died in a car crash. Word was, alcohol played a part. His career was just catching fire again. His final album became a bestseller. If you've ever sabotaged something good because you didn't know how to love yourself, if you've ever missed your moment because you were lost inside, then you'll understand. Zezy Hill wasn't just a singer. He was a mirror, a reminder of how fragile we all are. And sometimes, the kindest thing we can do for someone is not to fix them, but to stay and listen when they fall. Ray Charles, the blind man who saw through the haze of pain. When people hear the name Ray Charles, they think of Hit the Road Jack, Georgia on My Mind, and that unmistakable silhouette, swaying at the piano, eyes hidden behind dark glasses, lost in a world only he could feel. He was more than a musical legend, he was the soul of America's soundtrack. A genius. An icon. A man who turned pain into poetry. But behind the spotlight, the Grammys, and the women, lived a haunted soul, scarred by grief, numbed by guilt. Ray lost his sight at 7. But the darkness didn't begin there. It began the day he watched his younger brother drown, powerless to save him. That moment, burned into memory, never let go. And when the pain became too loud to silence, he reached for heroin. For alcohol. For escape. In 1961, during a performance in New York, something felt off. Backstage, a technician noticed Ray trying to strum a guitar, but his hands trembled like leaves in a storm. When he hit the stage, he missed the first chord, something that had never happened. His voice drifted, not off-key, but chasing a phantom melody only he could hear. The crowd roared with blind admiration, until a lone voice cut through the cheers. "He's drunk." No one argued. It was the truth laid bare. The next day, a local paper printed the line, "Ray Charles isn't singing for us anymore, he's singing to keep himself from falling apart." He was arrested several times for drugs and alcohol, but fame has a strange way of shielding pain. Each time he walked free. But once, during a Raw TV interview, Ray confessed, "When you can't see the world, you start creating your own. And sometimes, drugs help you not get lost in it." Some loved him. Others judged him. But no one could deny, whether high, hurting, or heartbroken, Ray Charles never lost his soul in the music. His voice, his notes, his every breath on the piano came from a place deeper than sight. He died at 73 after years of battling illness. At his funeral, no one spoke of the scandals. No one whispered about the drugs. Instead, they played a song for you, and let the tears fall. Ray Charles wasn't perfect. He was human. Broken in places we'll never understand. But through all the darkness, he gifted us something eternal. The truth that music can say what pain cannot. That even in our lowest moments, we are not alone. And maybe, just maybe, if we listen with our hearts instead of our ears, we'll learn to forgive others. And ourselves. Sam Cooke, the angel of soul who danced through the fire and died in the shadows. To millions of Black Americans searching for hope, Sam wasn't just a voice. He was the voice. Smooth as velvet, powerful as thunder, his songs like "A Change Is Gonna Come" didn't just play on the radio, they carried a generation's dreams. But behind that golden voice was a man quietly unraveling. Born into poverty, scarred by the early loss of his alcoholic father, Sam Cooke learned early that the world wouldn't hand him anything. He fought back with music, and with laughter, liquor, and late nights that dulled the pain he carried inside. Fame gave him the spotlight, but it couldn't save him from the dark. On December 11, 1964, after another night of heavy drinking and dreaming out loud about a record label that would uplift Black artists, Sam checked into the Hacienda Motel in Los Angeles with a young woman by his side. Hours later, she vanished, along with his wallet and his clothes. Drunk, disoriented, and angry, Sam stumbled out wearing only a coat and shoes. He burst into the manager's office, desperate for answers. What happened next is still debated. An argument, a struggle, a single gunshot. Sam Cooke died on the motel floor. A legend silenced, not by his music, but by confusion, alcohol, and perhaps something far more sinister. The headlines were cruel. Some painted him as a reckless womanizer. Others said he was set up, that his death was no accident. Friends whispered about conspiracy. Fans wept in disbelief. Was it a tragedy born of poor choices? Or was it the final blow to a black man who dared to challenge the rules of a white world? No matter the truth, one thing is clear. When Sam Cooke died, America didn't just lose a man. It lost its soul's soundtrack. He wasn't perfect, but he was real, flawed, brilliant, aching, and full of light. If you've ever hidden your heartbreak behind a smile, if you've ever searched for peace in the noise, then somewhere inside, you already know Sam. And maybe that's his final gift to us. Be kind, especially to those too broken to be kind to themselves. Because some of the brightest lights burn out too soon, but their music never fades. Chuck Jackson, the man who sang pain no one wanted to hear. In the glowing heart of the 1960s, Chuck Jackson was a soul prince. His voice, tender as bare skin, smooth as a sigh, wrapped itself around listeners like a midnight confession. Any Day Now wasn't just a song. It was the anthem of the brokenhearted, echoing in empty bedrooms long after the music stopped. But the spotlight is cruel. Chuck didn't chase scandals. He didn't play the fame game. And in an industry obsessed with headlines and hits, silence is unforgivable. Though gifted beyond words, he slipped through the cracks. Forgotten by the machine. Lost in the shuffle. The bottle became a friend. First just to help him sleep, later to remember who he used to be. In 1987, he was asked to perform at a Motown tribute show. A gesture of respect or pity. He showed up late, swaying as he walked. A backstage crew member remembered the scene vividly. Chuck sitting alone, whispering the lyrics to himself, eyes red, the thick smell of whiskey clinging to the air. When he finally stepped onto the stage, he stumbled through the chorus, then froze midline. Silence filled the room. Then he bowed deeply and whispered words that stunned the crowd. "I'm sorry. I can't sing today. I'm not sure who I'm singing to anymore." The moment was never aired. No headlines followed. But those who were there still remember the haunted look in his eyes as he walked away, like a man swallowed whole by memory. After that night, Chuck disappeared. No interviews. No new music. He quietly faded into the shadows and passed away in 2023. The world barely noticed. But hearts that once shattered to his songs, hearts that knew the ache of being left behind, still remember. Chuck Jackson didn't fail. He just didn't belong to a world that no longer knew how to listen to a sad love song. He didn't die from alcohol. He died because no one ever stopped to ask if he was okay. So if you ever meet someone like Chuck, don't look away. And if you find yourself in the lyrics of an old song, know this. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is simply listen. Because for someone out there, being heard might be the only thing keeping them alive. Eda James, the siren who sang through the smoke of her own fire. When Eda sang at last, time itself seemed to pause. Her voice wrapped around hearts like velvet and steel. But behind that timeless ballad was a woman who called her life a war zone. Born from an anonymous affair and raised in back rooms and alleyways, Eda didn't meet love first, she met betrayal. Long before applause, there were screams, survival, and sorrow. She sang not for fame, but for freedom, from the nightmares, the needles, the loneliness. On stage, she shimmered. The stage she burned. Quick to fight anyone, especially herself, Eda waged war with her demons in full view. Booze wasn't her escape, it became her prison. In 1974, at a concert in San Francisco, she walked on stage flashing a big, bright smile. But those who knew the look could see it. That wasn't sobriety, it was a mask soaked in whiskey. Staff backstage whispered she downed half a bottle before the show. When the band struck the first note, she didn't sing. She sat barefoot on the stage, heels off, and started talking. Not to the crowd, but to a ghost. A man who had left her, telling her he couldn't compete with the bottle. Then, without warning, she howled the opening line of I'd Rather Go Blind. Her voice was raw, razor-sharp and heartbreak-heavy. The crowd froze. Some cried. Some quietly walked out. The next day, newspapers called it a diva's breakdown, unraveling under the weight of liquor and loss. After that night, Eda vanished. Some said rehab. Others whispered suicide. But months later, she returned, no explanations, no apologies. Just a microphone and a truth. "I'm still here," she said. "And while I'm breathing, I'm singing like it's my last night on earth." Maybe that's why every note Eda ever sang carried the ache of someone who knew how it felt to almost disappear. She was a woman who bled through her music, but never let the blood stain the beauty. She sang with her wounds open, with rage in her chest and love still clinging to hope. So if you've ever cried over a memory no one else understands, you've touched Eda James' soul. Be gentle, with others and with yourself. Especially with those who smile while a storm screams endlessly inside. Solomon Burke, the soul king who fed the world but starved within. He wasn't just a singer. He was the king of soul, a towering figure, literally and musically, who helped shape the very sound of modern music by blending gospel's raw spirit with the rhythm of R&B and the fire of rock and roll. With his preacher's flair, royal robes, and a voice that could crack open hearts, Solomon Burke was once hailed as a sacred icon of early black music. But behind the velvet curtains and gold-plated thrones was a man consumed by food, by alcohol, and by a haunting emptiness that no applause could ever fill. One humid night in New Orleans during the late 80s, Solomon arrived on stage nearly an hour late. He was drenched in sweat, out of breath, and too exhausted to stand. Backstage whispers told a different story. Just minutes before the show, he had devoured a feast: fried chicken, cornbread, 2 cream pies, and half a bottle of hard liquor. At first, the crowd roared. But as he slurred lyrics, forgot verses, and paused mid-song to wipe his soaked brow with a handkerchief, the cheers turned to concerned murmurs. Still smiling, he ended the set early with a heartbreaking laugh. "I've sung for others my whole life. Tonight, I'm singing for myself, and I can't even remember the words." The tabloids pounced, mocking his weight, his excess, his decline. But in a later interview, Burke offered a quiet truth. "I never really learned to love myself. Only when I had food and wine beside me did I feel whole." Solomon Burke didn't lose his crown because he lacked greatness. He lost because no one ever taught him how to be vulnerable without shame. Let his story remind us, even kings can be prisoners in their own palaces. So be gentle, especially with those who seem to have it all, because they may be the ones silently starving for love. Percy Sledge, When a Man Loves and Falls Apart. Percy Sledge once stopped the world with a single line: "When a man loves a woman." It wasn't just a love song. It was a cry from the soul, a sorrowful anthem for every black heart that had ever loved in silence and suffered without a voice. But behind the voice that touched millions was a man quietly drowning. Born into poverty in rural Alabama, Percy worked as a hospital orderly before fate stumbled across his voice. One chance meeting with a producer changed everything. Almost overnight, he became a star. But fame arrived faster than he could handle, and loneliness returned even faster. He never truly escaped it. In 1982, at a modest show in Mississippi, the cracks began to show. Percy walked on stage, face flushed from alcohol, voice shaky. He made it through the first few lines, then sat down in the middle of the stage, covered his face, and broke into sobs. The crowd thought it was part of the act, until it wasn't. A sound technician remembered him whispering, "I don't deserve that song," before crying out the name of a woman no one recognized. The concert was canceled. Headlines the next day called it a breakdown, an old singer past his prime. But for those in the audience, it was something else. It was raw, human pain, too deep for applause, too honest for shame. Percy kept singing for the rest of his life. But the bottle never left his side. He was never perfect, but he was real. And sometimes, the hardest kindness isn't forgiving others. It's finding the strength to forgive yourself. Wilson Pickett, the Midnight Beast. They called him Mr. Midnight Hour, and not without reason. Pickett didn't sing music, He attacked it. He didn't perform, he exploded. His voice wasn't just sound, it was a battle cry, a thunderous howl of rage and soul that shook the walls of every stage he touched. But behind that raw, electrifying energy was a man constantly running from his demons. Born into brutal poverty and scarred by a violent father, Wilson Pickett carried a storm inside him, a fury born from being powerless in a world that never showed him mercy. The only time he felt in control was when the spotlight hit him, or when liquor numbed the pain. In 1991, that storm spilled into real life. Pickett was arrested in New Jersey after drunkenly crashing his car into a neighbor's house. No one was hurt, but when he stumbled out, he ranted like a man possessed. Witnesses say he shouted, "They won't let me sleep. They know I'm about to write the biggest hit of my life, at the police station." It sounded crazy. The headlines laughed. A soul legend, reduced to a tabloid spectacle. But those who truly knew Wilson never called him insane. They said he was a man the world never gave a chance to breathe. He wasn't screaming for attention. He was screaming because nobody ever listened. Wilson Pickett was the voice of the unheard. Behind the chaos, behind the whiskey and the fury, was just a boy who never stopped fighting to reclaim the power that was stolen from him. So the next time you hear someone yelling at the world, remember, it's not always madness. Sometimes it's survival. Donnie Hathaway, a genius trapped in a storm. He wasn't just a musician. He was a fragile soul with a voice that wrapped pain in velvet. His songs were lullabies for the broken, gentle cries for peace in a world too loud for his spirit. The man behind A Song for You and Someday We'll All Be Free carried a secret storm, one called schizophrenia. Donnie heard voices that weren't there. He trusted no one, not even those who loved him most. The only relief came in fleeting moments, drowned in alcohol. By 1979, during what would be his final recording session in New York, something had changed. His bandmates said he walked into the studio barefoot, wearing only a robe, his eyes distant, unfocused. One recalled, he just stood there, not singing, just whispering to himself with his eyes closed. When they approached him, Donnie suddenly shouted, "They're watching me. The mic is bugged." Then he ran out of the studio and into the cold night. Hours later, his body was found outside the Essex House Hotel. He had fallen from the 15th floor. The police called it suicide. The world called it a tragedy. But to those who truly listened to his music, it was a slow goodbye we'd heard all along. Someday We'll All Be Free wasn't just a song. It was a farewell. A quiet prayer from a man begging for stillness in his mind. Donnie Hathaway wasn't crazy. He was just unbearably sensitive in a world that wouldn't let him rest. And if you've ever been tired of pretending you're okay, if you've ever felt unseen while screaming inside, then maybe, just maybe, you understand him too. Remember this, being kind doesn't always mean fixing someone. Sometimes it means sitting beside their silence, and finally hearing what the world ignored. Billy Preston, the forgotten Beatle, the genius drowning in silence. He was hailed as the fifth member of the Beatles, the only black man to ever record with the legendary British band. His soulful keyboard work lit up classics like Get Back and Something, cementing his place in music history. But behind that brilliance was a broken boy who never truly escaped the darkness of his childhood. Abused, silenced, never taught how to heal. Alcohol came not as a vice, but as a crutch, then turned into a life sentence. In 1992, during a small theater performance in Los Angeles, the mask slipped. His eyes bloodshot, his words slurred, Billy hit the wrong notes over and over. Then mid-song, he froze, slammed his hands down on the keys, and cried out, "I can't hear the music anymore." The room fell silent. An eyewitness later found him asleep by a trash bin behind the venue, still clutching his keyboard like a lifeline. Whispers spread, "He's lost it." But those who truly knew him understood. Billy had been carrying an unbearable weight, the trauma of being sexually abused as a teen in church, a secret he buried for decades. Billy Preston's story is a painful reminder, not all genius glows with joy. Sometimes, the brightest lights flicker behind the heaviest shadows. And in moments like these, the kindest thing we can do isn't to mock or judge, but to gently ask, "Do you need someone to listen?" Marvin CE, the drunken poet of pain and pleasure. Marvin CE was never a mainstream superstar, but in the Deep South he was something more powerful, a voice of raw truth. To many in the Black Southern community, he was an underground legend. His songs, like the notorious Candy Liquor, weren't just sensual, they were aching confessions from a man who wore his scars on stage like badges of survival. Born into poverty and raised with little more than silence and struggle, Marvin turned the stage into his sanctuary. Even when intoxicated, it was the one place he could strip away the pain and just be. In 1999, during a now infamous concert in Jackson, Mississippi, Marvin stepped onto the stage holding a bottle of wine, not hiding it, not ashamed. He sang. He drank. And when the audience pushed back, he stared them down and said, "I sing for real and drink for real." Mid-performance, he dropped the mic, fell to his knees, cried out a woman's name, then stood back up and kept singing, as if haunted by ghosts no one else could see. The press called him chaotic. But some listeners heard something deeper, a man not performing, but bleeding through music. To some, Marvin was offensive. To others, he was a mirror of their own pain. Because if you've ever been poor, abandoned, or broken, you understand, he didn't drink for pleasure. He drank to keep breathing. Marvin CE reminds us that not all cries for help sound like whispers. Some come wrapped in vulgar lyrics and a bottle of wine. And the kindest among us aren't the ones who judge, they're the ones who listen anyway. Bobby Womack, the man who betrayed his soul just to survive. Once hailed as the raw voice of 70s R&B, Bobby Womack could write, play, and sing like every note came from a wound in his heart. But behind the music was a life tangled in heartbreak and controversy. After the shocking death of his mentor and best friend Sam Cooke, Bobby stunned the world by marrying Cooke's widow, just months after the funeral. The backlash was swift and brutal. The black music community turned its back on him, and Bobby turned to alcohol and drugs to numb the shame. In 1985, during a show in Detroit, he stumbled on stage glassy-eyed, slurring his words. The crowd grew restless, then angry. As the boos rose, Bobby snapped. He hurled the mic to the floor and yelled, "You love my voice, but none of you love me." A friend later recalled finding him that night alone in his hotel room, drunk, broken, and quietly sobbing while playing a cassette of his own songs. He listened to his younger self sing and wept like a child. The world remembers Bobby Womack as a man who burned bridges and wrecked his legacy. But for anyone who's ever been haunted by regret or judged without mercy, Bobby was something else. A man drowning in sorrow, craving redemption. Sometimes, the kindest thing we can do is to hear the pain that others are too ashamed to say out loud. Teddy Pendergrass, the man who shattered at the peak of his glory. He was the ultimate R&B heartthrob, a sex symbol whose voice made women melt and whose concerts were so electrifying, they were exclusively for female fans. But behind the smooth voice and smoldering looks was a man haunted by pain. He used alcohol to numb it, until it nearly cost him everything. In 1982, at the height of his fame, Teddy crashed his Rolls-Royce in Philadelphia while driving under the influence. Beside him was a transgender woman, a detail that sparked headlines and whispers. The crash left him paralyzed from the chest down. One moment he was on top of the world. The next, everything changed. Some fans stood by him. Others turned away. But Teddy didn't stay down. He rolled back onto the stage in a wheelchair, singing with the same fire as before. He embraced his new reality, forgave himself, and kept going. And maybe that's the lesson he left us. No matter what breaks us, we still have the power to rise. And sometimes, the greatest act of strength is simply choosing to be kind to our past. Betty Wright, the soul siren who wiped away her tears with a glass of bitter wine. She was the unapologetic voice of strong black women, a powerhouse whose anthem, "Clean Up Woman," became a battle cry for the heartbroken who refused to stay down. But behind the fearless vocals was a woman quietly carrying unbearable pain, losing her son to a senseless shooting, watching love slip through her fingers, and feeling the cold sting of being forgotten by an industry she helped shape. As the spotlight faded, Betty turned to the bottle. One lonely night in Miami, After performing in a small club, she didn't go back to her hotel. Instead, she sat in her car, sipping and sobbing under the streetlights. A backstage worker later recalled her whispering, "I sing to live. But sometimes, I just want to be silent." The tabloids never told that story. But those who were there never forgot the look in her eyes. Strong, yes, but tired. Always tired. Betty never let the world see her fall apart. Yet if you really listen close, you'll hear it. That soft, aching cry for help tucked between the notes. Sometimes, the deepest kindness is simply recognizing the pain behind the music. Gil Scott Haron, the prophet who drowned in his own warning. Gil Scott Haron wasn't just a musician, he was a movement. A voice for the voiceless. A poet of pain, truth, and revolution. When he declared, "The revolution will not be televised," he wasn't just writing a song, he was shaking America awake in the 1970s, giving a generation of black youth a mirror, a weapon, and a spark. But the prophet who cried out for justice was slowly silenced, not by the system he fought, but by the demons he couldn't outrun. Born without a father, raised in the shadows of segregation and poverty, Gil carried the world's weight in his verses, but had no one to carry his own sorrow when the curtains closed. For over 30 years, he battled addiction, disappearing into a haze of drugs and isolation. In 2001, when arrested with drugs at the airport, he stood in court and refused legal help. "I know I was wrong," he said, "but you were wrong long before me." That night, a guard overheard him whispering poetry to himself in his jail cell, voice cracking, like a flame flickering in its final breath. Gil Scott Haron burned bright. Too bright. A candle meant to guide us through the dark, but one that burned out far too fast. Some people still debate whether to praise him or pity him, but those who truly listen know better. He never asked us to be perfect. He asked us to stop pretending. To stop acting like strength means silence. His life reminds us, being broken doesn't mean you're worthless. It means you're human. If you've ever felt unheard, invisible, or misunderstood, remember, compassion begins not with explanations, but with kindness. Every artist in this story used their voice to plead for empathy. Don't just remember them for the moments they stumbled, honor them for the times they stood tall again. Because the truth is, kindness remains the most powerful legacy any of us can leave behind. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If these stories stirred something in you, please hit that like button, share this video, and drop a comment with the artist who moved you the most. Sometimes, it's your words that help keep their memory alive.